Notes for today is the evidence of evolution. So I really enjoy this set of slides. We get to talk about a lot of really cool things that you guys might not have thought before. Okay, so the first set of evidence that they use to support evolution is obviously fossils. These are going to be remains or traces of organisms that lived in the past. There are different types. One is an imprint fossil. I'm sure you guys have seen this before. It's like an imprint of an organism. So think of the soft parts. So if something was like leaning or something passed away and leaned against something, it'd be that hard structure of an imprint of the organism. We also have the fossil mold. That's where rock or minerals take on the shape of the organism. So like the hard parts of the organism, and it kind of forms a mold fossil. So here's some examples. You can see these are more imprints. It's not the actual skeleton itself, but it is like an imprint of it on an area. These are going to be our molds where you see it can fill in, and then some might actually just be the bones themselves, the actual fossil. Another way that they use fossils to kind of help support the idea of evolution. So just think of Charles Darwin. Remember, we said that he found fossils on his voyage on the HMS Beagle, and he found some of living things. And then he was kind of the first one to start finding these organisms like, okay, what are these? We don't have these animals here. So he argued that the fossil record provided evidence that living things have been evolving for millions of years. So sometimes the fossil records include similar intermediate forms of a group of organisms that together suggest gradual modification over time. So if you look at these four organisms here, these are all cephalopods, which basically is a group of octopi and squid. And if you look at the fossils, it indicates that the organisms gradually evolved a longer, more coiled shell. So kind of start now, again, we're not talking about a few years here, guys. It's taking a lot of time of natural selection and adapting to the environment. So over time, eventually it needed a longer shell. And then over time, it started to kind of coil until we get to organisms that we see today that have a more coiled shell. And again, guys, we're talking about millions of years here that this is occurring. Okay. Also, too, how can we tell how old a fossil is? That's another good question a lot of people have. They're like, okay, well, just because it's there, we don't know what time. So obviously, the lower you go down into rock layers when they're digging, the older the rock is. So they can estimate about how old an individual is based on how far down it is in the rock. Okay. This is one of my favorite pieces of evidence. So the anatomical evidence. This is where we're going to compare structures of various organisms. Okay. Body parts that are similar in structure are called homologous structures. And we'll take a look at what that means. So this is where it gets a little weird, and I'll show you a picture here in a second. An example of homologous structures. So if we were to look at the flipper of a whale, the wing of a bird, an arm of a human, and a leg of a frog, actually those same bone, they're very similar bones, they're just different sizes. But all of these species have those bones in that area. This suggests that because they're common structures, there must have been some common ancestor that connects all of us. So, for example, we'll take a look at here. So they say this is, the homologous structure. We all came from some similar organism. You can see the color bones, and it shows you over time how they've gone longer. But you can still see that they're very similar, even though they all use these for different things, walking, flying, swimming, but they're all very similar structures. So the limbs of these four modern vertebrates are homologous structures. They provide evidence of a common ancestor whose bones may have resembled those of the ancient fish shown here. Notice that different colors are used to show related structures. Okay, this one's really fun. Vestigial organs. These are reduced in size and they have no use. So we will look at some organisms that have certain structures, but they're kind of just there. There's not really an importance to them, but that shows us that maybe they were in a past. So over time, they've gotten smaller and smaller until maybe they will not longer be there. Oftentimes, we find these organs and body parts are still useful in other organisms, again, showing common ancestry. We'll start with the first one. Oops. The first one's the appendix. I'm sure you guys have all known. They actually don't really know right now what is the function of the appendix. They think in years past, now our diet, we have accessible foods to where we don't have to chew a lot. But think way back in the day with like cave people and stuff, they had to eat a lot of raw material, eat a lot of things that they really had to chew. So they think that this might have been there to kind of help break down excess foods. They thought it could possibly use to um, store toxins, which are still kind of leaning towards that. But a lot of individuals are actually being born without an appendix, showing again that there's not really per se a use for it. Some people get their appendix taken out and they're still able to live. So here's some other ones. These are really cool. So wings on a flightless bird. Have you ever really thought about that? So we know that they are common ancestor. All birds are related, but it's really weird. Why would a bird have wings if it did not need them? So kind of think about that one. And over time, maybe that species of birds will slowly not have wings. I mean, they're useless for that species. Another one is goosebumps for us. Now, this is very useful for other mammals. Basically what happens is when you get cold, obviously your hair kind of stands on end and it helps warm the body. Now for us, we back in the day, humans had a lot, Homo sapiens had a lot of hair, but now we don't. So it doesn't really help us as much. Okay, this one's also interesting. Male breast tissue and nipples. So in females, it is used for breastfeeding and providing nourishment to their young, but males don't really need that structure. It's useless for them. So that's another vestigial organ. This one's one of my favorite. So this is just crazy. I remember when I learned this the first time, it was mind blowing. If you zoom in at the back of the whale right here, showing it, this is the box. Whales, there's these bones that they have that are completely useless, but they're actually little hind legs for bones in whales. They were used. So this shows us that, there might have been some species related to that actually had legs back here that was able to walk on land. They're really tiny. Obviously, we don't see whales walking around, but it has structures for hind legs. Okay, another one is wisdom teeth. Again, back in the day, they really needed to grind down their food. They needed kind of that extra set of teeth to help do that. We do not need that anymore. Actually, my husband's two brothers were born without wisdom teeth. So individuals are being born without them as well because they're not needed. Sex organs in dandelions, they reproduce by cloning. Asexual reproduction, so they are not needing those sex organs. So again, over time, maybe they will not be in certain species of flowers that do that. And then lastly, the tailbone. Tailbone is related to possibly having a tail, which obviously Homo sapiens do not have tails, but we still have that structure that could lead to a tail. So I always think those are pretty fun. Okay, another set of evidence is embryological evidence. This is the early stages of development of many vertebrates are very similar. Again, this is going to show common ancestry. So gill slits in fish, chicken, rabbit, human, all of this, it looks the same. We used to do this activity, which unfortunately won't be able to do, but I gave you guys like 6 pictures. One was of a fish, a turtle, a chicken, a rabbit, a human, and a cat, and you had to put them in the first trimester, second trimester, and third trimester. And when I gave you all the first trimester ones, you couldn't tell the difference between a fish and a human. Like we all look the exact, all species look the exact same in that first. So for example, this is even more developed, but one of these is a cat and one of these is a human. Can't really tell the difference. It's not really until the second and third trimester that they start to actually like turtle would start forming a shell, chicken would start forming a beak, but those first few stages, they look the exact same. If you guessed it right, the top's a human, bottom's a cat. I'll see if I can pull up a picture if we have time after the notes so I can show you what I'm talking about. Oh, no, actually, here it is right here. Okay, so let's look at our species here. So if I were to give you a fish and a human, guys, these are looking pretty similar. Look at the human and the rabbit. All these look the same. If I didn't have these names under here, would you really be able to tell which is which? Now, once we get into the second trimester, fish and salamanders start to differentiate pretty fast. But these still look the same. Okay, I would say probably turtle and chicken are different. Human and rabbit are a little bit closer, but you got to think those are mammals too. Okay, and then obviously by the third trimester we can tell them apart. Okay, and then lastly, we have biochemical evidence. Organisms with similar anatomical and embryological features also have similar amino acid chains, therefore, similar DNA sequences. Remember, amino acids help build the protein, and the structure of amino acids come from the DNA. Okay, so that's it for the notes. We will be doing a lab next week and doing some activities, but we have a really cool lab that we're going to start dating things based on how far it is down in the rock and things like that. So I'll give you guys some time to work on that next week.